Very good. We are in 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, that is, and you guys would have covered last week down through verse 15, and so we will begin at verse 16. But just to remind you, set this up as far as and I'm sure you guys have talked about this, but bottom line, the beginning of this with the story of Uzzah reminds us of just David's words are just great when he says that how can we have the Lord? Well, going back to 1 Samuel when the people at Beth Shemesh, you have either 70 or 70,000 or so that die because they look in the Ark of Covenant, and then that's what you say, how can we have the Lord in our midst? And so that's the first time they try to move the Ark, and this time, and then now the Ark is moved again, and you see David's response after Uzzah dies. He's first angry, and then he's afraid, and then he says, forget the whole thing. let's just send this over to the house of Obed-Edom. And I might just comment, when we get angry or have the attitude that David had, angry or fearful at God because of an event, what should that tell us? Pardon?
Our faith isn't strong.
Okay, well, that would be true. And in what way, what is really the problem with our faith in that case? What are we actually detailed? What are we actually doing when we do that, Sarah?
Questioning God.
Yeah, we're questioning God. Okay, good, Sarah.
Saying we don't trust Him to work it out.
Yeah, if I'm angry with God, who's got the problem? I do. God's not wrong. If God does something and I'm like, well, who wants to get near you? You're in a bad mood or something. If that's my attitude, I'm obviously got a problem because God does not have a problem. This is in some ways, maybe not quite as bad, but it's very similar to Job as he's going through his trial, and he's totally upset with what's going on. He thinks this has all been unjust. It shouldn't have happened, etc., etc. Well, Job, who's really the problem here? And what happens in this is it comes out of a lack of knowledge. Because David later, once the house of Obed-Edom is blessed, David steps back, according to 1 Chronicles 15, David steps back and scratches his head and thinks, maybe I better take a look at this again as to what went wrong. And he figures out he was at fault. Well, lo and behold, who would have believed that? And that the priests were at fault because they didn't check out what was the proper way to move the ark. So I see that so much today, even with Christians who can just get really fraught at what's going on with them and what's happening to them and turn a point of finger to God. And you're going, hold on. That is typically just a lack of knowledge. You don't know God very well, and you certainly aren't respecting His position over yours. We're like bugs in walking across a lawn without any idea of what's going on in the world around us, and we think we can have some kind of super knowledge. Yeah.
What's amazing is how the ark is only there 3 months at Obed-Edom, and yet they recognize that he is blessed. How
I'm wondering the same thing.
quickly,
Yeah.
3 months, you become blessed. I mean,
Yeah. All his goats gave birth to triplets. Instead of twins, they were all triplets, or something. You really do wonder how could they notice how tremendously blessed he all of a sudden was. But they certainly drew the conclusion that something. And David went, it's not that God is bad. It's not that God is mean. It's that we messed up here. We did something we shouldn't have done. And so you at least see David making that adjustment, but that's just really, really important. So in that story, just summarizing, in that story you see the holiness of the Lord. You see how God is a holy God, and it is very important that we approach God in holiness. And God doesn't care if you're King David. You're going to suffer the consequences of not doing what he said. He just doesn't show partiality, and it's important for us to see that. One other thing, in the first 14 verses of chapter 6, or 15 verses of chapter 6, 2 Samuel, is this is a picture of the beginning of restoration. You need to keep that in mind. God restoring Israel. Where have they been? Period of Judges. Not good. Where have they been? King Saul. Really not good. So God now is restoring Israel back to the condition that he desires, and foreshadowing, of course, eventually Christ. Okay, so let's take a look now at 6:16 down through verse 23. Chock full of stuff here that I think is really cool to talk about. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David. By the way, and I know Michael said this already, I can't help it, but you notice David did not curb his zeal in bringing him in. Did not curb his zeal. He's still zealous. He's just doing it right now. So important not to lose the zeal. So as they're bringing the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed among all of them, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house. And David returned to bless his household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." Whew, thank you, Michal. And David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord, and I will celebrate before the Lord, and I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in your eyes, but by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. All right, I think a lot of questions that we should ask there, and a lot of things that we should point out. I'm going to ask the first question, then you point out some things that are questions that you would have, or disturbing things that you see. So the first thing I would ask, when it says that she despised him in her heart, any idea, as you know, sometimes people lash out not because of the event of the moment, but something has happened in the past that has already caused her to be pretty upset. So putting yourself in Michal's position, what might that be? Go ahead.
Is increased in concubines and wives.
Okay.
That was earlier.
Yeah, she comes in, and it's not just her. True.
I don't know if she was happy about being brought back.
Yeah.
Her husband followed
Right.
him,
Right.
protesting that, crying, and everything else.
Yes.
And I don't know if she was willingly came back.
Yeah. Well, that's a real good point. That's what I think about. I think to the two of you, both of your answers fit in. She's with a guy who loves her so much that he's following. I mean, it's a little heartbreaking, actually. She got ripped away from David and, thrown to this other guy, but she's made the best of it.
And just like he said, she had a lot of competition.
Yeah, right. And then she gets back, and she's not the only wife, and there's all these illicit concubines and all this stuff going on. I can see why she wouldn't be happy. But she really shot herself in the foot when she when she did that. Okay, what else stands out to you, or questions you have about that, Mara?
Could she be thinking about David in contrast to her father and how David is not as kingly, perhaps?
There you go. I think that's a good point. So how was David not acting kingly?
By his dancing.
He's dancing. Yeah, and what?
Taking off his kingly garment.
Yeah, he's not wearing his kingly garments. He's wearing an ephod. He doesn't have an outer robe on. It's not that he's immodest. He's just wearing clothes like a common person would wear clothes. And what is the what is David's conclusion? Why would David not wear his kingly clothes?
Humility before the Lord.
Okay, yeah, his humility before the Lord. It's like saying, when I'm before the Lord, I'm not a king. The Lord's the king. I'm not trying to go, hey, look at me. That's kind of thing. Was there somebody else over here? Yeah.
I was going to say similar.
Okay.
Yeah, but he, before God, he's the same as everyone else. And I'm sure she doesn't like that because that's not what she expects a king to
Yeah.
act like.
What was her dad like that would be so different? I'm gonna excuse me. I'm not making a phone call here. I'm going to just come on.
Saul was so focused on the exterior and thinking about how it looked.
Yeah. So it was all about the exterior. It was all about how everything looked. He wanted to be the center of attention of everything, and so when he's not, then that was not something that he was happy about.
He wore his kingly robes into the cave and David cut off the corner.
There you go. I hadn't thought of that. That's right too. He's always got his spear, you know. I'm sure David down there as he's dancing, he's got his spear next to him. And yeah, Saul is just one of those guys that as a leader, he was obviously, when he was chosen, didn't feel he had a complex, an inferiority complex, and so then he tries to make up for it by overreacting and trying to get all this glory and stuff like this. Is somebody else over here? Nope. Comment? Okay. So anyway, you do see that. Yeah, Chip.
I couldn't help but think, or I haven't in the past thought of this in this section when getting over the Revelation. Whatever you're saying is correct, at least the lines of what I've always thought, that in this case, he was not the king. He was worshiping the king.
Yes.
And this is exhibited by when he got it right and started carrying the ark on by the staffs and putting it on the priest's shoulders and killing an ox and a steer every 6 steps.
6 steps, yeah.
And another 6 steps, and another 6 steps. They probably did this for miles.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine what this road looked behind them. And the whole way they're playing the flutes.
Yeah.
And they're celebrating. And I couldn't help but think of Revelation chapter 4. When you're in this throne scene, and in verses 9 it says, "And when the living creatures gave glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne, to him who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders will fall down before him who sits on the throne, and they will worship him who lives forever and ever, and will cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Worthy are you, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honor and power." So it's as if David to me is saying, I am not a king in the presence of the king.
Exactly.
He's the one that's worthy of the glory and the honor, not me.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And that's the way we need to live our lives. We all have different things to do in the kingdom, different responsibilities. But when it comes right down to it, all honor and glory goes to him. And we need to always keep that in mind. And David is a great example here of that. Just really terrific, Mara.
When we think of the word modesty, we are lowering ourselves. In the Bible, modesty is you're not putting yourself in a higher position.
Good.
You're
Yeah.
lowering yourself. And people, I've heard this story referred to as, oh, David was immodest. No, he was modest before the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, the text first tells us, yes, he's dressed in a linen ephod. The wife, Michael, she says, oh, you uncovered yourself. Well, it wasn't that he didn't have anything on. She's just trying to exaggerate the situation and make fun of him. Yeah, Michael.
I love verse 19. The idea that he gave everybody a cake and raisins and a portion of meat. Kind of thinking back to what Jacob brought up at the end of 1 Samuel, the idea of like David giving the spoils to cities of Judah, and that like Saul was taking and David started to give.
Yeah.
And here, like, not only spiritual restoration, but like take this feast with you as you
Right.
go. It's kind of a good foretelling of the blessing of his kingdom.
Good. And what, when you think of David doing this and providing this for the people, what is he presenting himself as beyond king? What's he? Provider. And what did the Old Testament call kings and what they were supposed to do that way?
A conduit of God's generosity.
Okay, true. There's one word still used, shepherds. That's right. He's showing himself to be a shepherd of the people. He's providing for them instead of providing for his own honor and glory. He's providing for them. And so David continues, and we've seen this so far up here, that he's always acting as a shepherd. He's never thinking of himself better than everybody else. He's a great leader, but he's also humble. And you see a really beautiful character there.
One more picture that I can't help but think of is that Jesus gave up everything that he had as the prince.
Yeah.
In Philippians, we read where he left it all behind. None of those
Right.
entrapments mattered, and he humbled himself and became
Yes.
one of mankind in order to honor and glorify his Father, the true Jehovah. And again, that's a picture that David's showing here. By giving up his robes, he has no kingly status.
Right.
As Jesus emptied himself
Right.
of that status and became a human being.
Now you see how when Jesus came to the earth, he didn't choose to be born from a royalty family. He didn't choose to be born into a rich family and live in a fancy house. He chooses to be born in poverty, but just from people that would have been considered by the people around as just nobodies. And that's who he comes to save. So real cool.
Change in the tent. Is this the tabernacle?
Yeah.
He says he put it in
No.
the tent. And
That's
I don't
right.
think it is.
No, it's not. Yeah, this is not the tabernacle yet. This is where the ark is going to be housed. Tabernacle is still at Gilgal. Is that where it is, Michael? I think it is at this time. Come on, you're supposed to be sharp on this. You taught First Samuel. You're supposed to know this right now. I think the tabernacle right now is still at Gilgal, but he places the ark here. And sets the tent up and brings it in Jerusalem. And then it's going to be a number of years before, well, it's, I think, not until the temple is actually built. Maybe in Solomon's day. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check that, but I'm not sure that they even get the tabernacle in Jerusalem by that time. Maybe so. But it's going to be a number of years before the tabernacle is transferred over there. Right. Okay, so we've seen some really cool things, the blessings, the giving and gifts, burnt offerings and peace offerings. He offers burnt offerings, peace offerings. How easy it is to read over that. Don't read over that. So when you offer burnt offerings, what are you saying?
For your sin, right? It's for your sin.
Burnt offerings are for sin, true. They can be for sin. There's more specific or sin offerings that would be for that too, but you can see burnt offerings in Leviticus 1. We'll talk about that sins are forgiven at that time, but burnt offerings are a little more than that. Now see, you can't go to heaven if you don't know what all 5 burnt offerings represent for us today. Really important. Mara.
Were they willful, like by your own desire to do it? They weren't
You mean a free will offering? Yes. The first 3 offerings of Leviticus, burnt, grain, and peace or fellowship offerings, are all free will offerings. They can be offered at any time and as much as you like. Sin offerings and trespass offerings had to be offered when you fell into those sins. Okay, that's true. What did it represent, though? Okay. No, okay. See, don't wave your hand at me. So, in the book of Mark, when Jesus deals with a scribe, and the scribe comes to Jesus and says, "What's the first and great commandment?" And in the law, and Jesus says to love God with all your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, to love your neighbor as yourself. And the scribe answered wisely, and he says, "Yes, Lord, those are the 2 greatest commandments, for that is more than all whole burnt offerings." Burnt offering, how was the burnt offering offered? Anybody eat part of it? No. All opened up, etc., all burned up to God. It is a representation of giving oneself completely wholly from inside out to God. It is a total giving. And so it is a symbolic way to say, I am totally yours. This animal represents what I am offering you. Very much like the counterpart to that would be Romans 12:1. I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you offer your bodies a holy, living sacrifice. So completely offering oneself to God. So he offers burnt offerings, indicating we are yours. We are offering ourselves completely to you. Paul would say it in Galatians 2:20, no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That same type of thing. Peace offerings, or other name for it is fellowship offering. What's that represent? It represents what it sounds like.
The God will give them peace.
Peace with who? Fellowship with who? With God. That's right. This is a representation of our fellowship and peace with God. We have been reconciled. Romans 5 talks about that now that we stand by faith, we are reconciled, we have peace with God. We have full fellowship with him. In fact, the way the offering is given indicates that full fellowship, because in the peace offering, everybody eats it, including God. So part of it is given to God. In fact, during that time, they will do a wave offering. The priest takes it and he waves it toward God, symbolizing giving it to God and bringing it back. Then the offerer will eat some of it. In fact, the offerer invites all kinds of people, anybody he can invite, to come and participate in eating this. It's a great rejoicing feast. And the priest eat of it. So it's the only offering where everybody partakes, and it is a tremendous rejoicing. It's just a feast of peace, and it's the best of the best. You could just say that's the way it is. It's the only offering where the offerer actually eats some. The priest eat of all the offerings except the burnt offering. The priest will take part. There's a part, the right shoulder and the breast. And so they eat that part. And they eat part of the grain offering too. That's right. So each of the priest will eat part of that, but this is the offering in which the offerer actually participates. A big meal, big feast. So it's really cool. So if you ever want to do a peace offering, let me know. I'll come. There you go. Okay, so you see that. How about David? Okay, David returns to his house, and we see that when you put yourself in that scene, David is coming back to bless his house. And what's it like if you're David and you walk into the house and you're ready to bless your house? It's been the day of all days. You have been rejoicing all of this, and your wife, what's that like?
She's meeting him at the door.
Yeah, she ruins the whole day. You know, she just takes away all the joy. She just ruins everything by demeaning him, etc. And so we've talked about what she says to him, but define David's reply in verse 21 and 22. What is David saying to her? A few things there.
To me, it's saying these female servants are going to have more children than you.
Well, let's see.
That would be hard to do. We only have that one.
Yeah. But the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I should be held in honor. I don't know about having children, but these aren't David's servants, remember. These aren't David's women. They are just, they were the female servants that were there rejoicing and stuff. Yeah.
David is saying that the Lord had a plan, and I'm just part of it, and the Lord has chosen me to now be the next king. So
Okay.
therefore I will celebrate and rejoice and be glad.
Yeah. All right. So he's certainly saying that, certainly just pointing out that he is doing what the Lord's will is. What did he say that might have been a little cutting? Yes,
A little
Callie.
dig about,
What?
it was a little dig about
Yeah.
how he was chosen above her
Yes.
father.
I was chosen above your father. I'm sure that little statement stung a bit. You know?
Not only that, but over your father and anybody in his
And anybody else, that's right,
family.
in his family.
Yeah,
That's right.
it's a little snippet. I mean, it's a little snippy here.
Yeah, it definitely.
I mean, he kind of gets snippy back.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. That didn't all go down real well. So she doesn't hold him in honor. Go ahead.
Tagging on those comments, interesting, I don't think, to kind of see the dynamic of her knowledge of God and why she would say this, but to see his response again shows his desire and commitment to God
Yeah.
and serving. And it shows also that it doesn't matter who challenges you in your faith, even if it's your spouse, you're honest to God first and foremost.
Yeah. Good.
And the thing about his leadership here, even in his home, he's laying down the law who he's serving. And it was a great comeback by him. We can laugh at that. But rightfully so, because it just shows his commitment to God and his knowledge of who God
Yeah.
is and how we should be.
And it's really interesting to me how he says, and as for those female servants, I will be even more contemptible in my own eyes. And they will recognize the kind of person I am, to not exalt myself, etc., and they will hold me in honor. You may not, wife of my youth, you may not, but this is the way. Even those female servants that you've put down and actually disparaged because they were out there, they won't have that attitude. So yeah, it's a sharp one. Okay, and then she doesn't have a child till the day of her death. Who do you ascribe that to, David or God? Yes. Maybe a combination of the both. Yeah, I go ahead.
My opinion is that whenever that seems to happen in the scriptures, most of the time, not every time, I wouldn't know, I can't recall every time.
Yeah.
But it seems that if God has a hand in it, it says something about he closed your womb.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't say that here. So I think I think David pretty much said, yeah, I'm done with you.
Yeah, and that's probably so. But I'm like Michael, but probably God went, yeah, that's right. Because what are we seeing throughout 2 Samuel? The diminishing of Saul's house and the exaltation of David's house. And God has promised that Saul's house is out because of what he did. So you definitely see that. You say something, Dan?
Well, I was just going to say, at one point, Michael saved his life
Yes,
over her father.
exactly.
So there's a lot here we don't know.
Yeah, that's right. And I thought about the same thing. It's kind of shocking to see this turn here, but of course, there's been a lot of water's gone over the bridge since that's happened. It's exactly right, Callie.
Makes me wonder if she was trying to play person that she thought was going to be on top,
Yeah.
more so than who was in the right. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think at the bottom line is it's all about, we're royalty around here, and we need to act like royalty, and you acted like a goofball, dancing and all of this. Okay, you should have one other major question here after you get all done. There should be one big question that you're asking about this text, what in the event in this text. Anybody know?
Did you just say what was the last part of what he said?
At some event that happened in this text, there should be a question that you ask that should be very perplexing.
Does dancing mean?
Nah, I wasn't insisting that we dance on Sunday morning, but I was suggesting a bit, but no. No. Yeah, strike that from the record. That's right. Delete.
I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but David gave gifts to everybody. And he comes home to bless them.
Yeah.
Nothing said about the gift.
Well, I would imagine, and in a blessing there would be something, but I don't know what that would entail. Mara?
I'm probably off, but it seems weird that David is doing the burnt offerings himself and not a priest. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, just because David offers burnt offerings doesn't necessarily mean that he's the one that's originator of it. Doesn't mean that the priests maybe aren't participating there. I don't know. That'd be guessing. This isn't a guess. So here's the question. You want to say it, Michael?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. I thought maybe you had the answer. Michael, everybody's rejoicing about the ark coming into Jerusalem. What are you doing up in the window?
She wanted to participate.
Yeah, she's too good for that. She's just going to sit and look down her nose out the window at all these goofy people standing out there humbling themselves before the God of Israel. Boy, if she's not like her father. Yeah, that'd do it for me. That's pretty bad. So.
What an application for us to not be like that when, I don't know, maybe somebody's worshiping a different way than we worship?
Yeah.
Or are we just standing at the window
Yeah.
judging them for what they're
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah, that's right. Well, remember, we don't praise the Lord around here, so keep it quiet. That's right.
I think another lesson that I pick up in that is not to let people that are very close to you steal your zeal.
Right.
He's saying, I'm going to keep on doing everything I'm doing, just
Yeah.
doing it for God.
Yeah.
There are other great comments made by Brian about pronouncing basically that God comes first in my life, and that's not going to change. But he's also saying he's not going to lose his zeal. He said he's going to continue to celebrate.
That's right.
Even more.
And that is, it's so beautiful. And of course, you see this in David's Psalms over and again. David's heart of wanting to serve God and loving God and the zeal he has from God it just never stops. And God is his greatest desire. And that is such a perfect example. No wonder God had him write 80, 90 different Psalms. It's just amazing. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, you actually just touched on it. You were seeing pictures of two different hearts.
Yeah.
Seeing one with the glory of man and one against the glory of God.
That's right. Yeah, one glorifying man, one glorifying God. That's exactly right. Okay, so anything else on this section before we go on? We've got a little bit of time. We can go on. Let's see. This was I thought an interesting conclusion that someone gave with this particular chapter and the death of Uzzah, etc. And it was an analogy that came out of C.S. Lewis' book, children's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And the quote is, when Lucy is talking to Mr. Beaver about Aslan, who represents God, if you haven't read the story. She asks him whether Aslan is safe, to which Mr. Beaver replies, safe? Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he is good. He's the king, I tell you. Now, that was a kind of a cool line that would represent a pretty good representation of God. Safe? Safe to go into the presence of God? Well, can't say it's safe, but he's good. It's not always safe. It depends on how you go. So I think that was interesting. All right. Chapter 7, if you never remember any chapter in 2 Samuel, you must remember 2 Samuel 7, because it is the chapter that is the great prophetic chapter that all other biblical Messiah chapters, King Messiah chapters are based on. It all comes down to this. So in 7:1, now when the king lived in his house and the Lord had given rest from all his surrounding enemies, the king said to Nathan the prophet, see now I dwell in the house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in a tent. Nathan said to the king, do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you. But that same night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, would you build me a house to dwell in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent for my dwelling in all places where I have moved with all the people of Israel. Did I speak a word with any of the judges of Israel whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? So if God never told him to build a house, what should be the conclusion? You don't build a house. He didn't tell you to build that. That's kind of basically what God is saying. Did I ever tell you to build a house? I didn't tell you to build a house. So you just stop it. We'll learn in Chronicles that David will add to that because he was a man of war. He didn't want him to build a house. But this is the first principle here. All right. So then, verse 8, now therefore thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and I have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make you a great name like the name of the great ones on the earth. Who's that sound like? That promise right there. Abraham, yeah. This is very Abrahamic. It's very, very similar to God's promises to Abraham. And then verse 10, and I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more, and violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly. All right, let's stop there. Give some observations about that verse, especially about when that verse was fulfilled. Pardon?
They're in the promised land right now.
Yeah, they're already in the promised land, so when was this fulfilled? They've been in the promised land for 500 years.
Was fulfilled with Jesus?
Yeah, is it fulfilled yet?
Well, we still have the war with Satan.
There you go. That's right. This is a statement of the ultimate rest, and it is referenced in a way in Hebrews chapter 4 when he actually says Joshua did not give them rest, and then turns around and says we will rest when we have rested from our works, meaning death. So that doesn't happen. And then the Hebrew writer also said in Hebrews 2:5, speaking of David's Psalm 8, saying that the world to come was not subjected to angels. Who's the world to come subjected to? Us. That's right. And he says, quotes that from Psalm 8, that we are going to be in control of the world to come, whatever that means. But at any rate, this is what he's talking about. Now here's something just from this. I remind you, the mistake a lot of times is made, and I've had this run in I don't know how many times. The mistake is often made back when premillennialism was really going hot and heavy. 20 25, 30 years ago, and all the way back into the 1930s. I remember it well. So you went all the way back there, and you have, it's going hot and heavy, and there's all kinds of debates and things like this about premillennialism. It's invading in the church, etc. And one of the arguments of premillennialists was that the promise to Joshua and the people of giving them rest from their enemies and a land where they rested had not been fulfilled yet. And therefore, in the 1,000-year reign, it would be fulfilled, and the earth would be rest, and God would finally fulfill the promises that he had made to Joshua and his family. And so that kind of, well, accurately so, those who debated against that said, well, it says in Joshua that he gave them rest. And it does. That they conquered and they got rest, etc. But then you read Hebrews 4, and the scripture says Joshua didn't give them rest. And you go, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about an event back here in Joshua's day that is escalated to, just as so many of the prophecies are, escalated to a greater degree in God's kingdom. We get the ultimate rest, just like we are the ultimate great nation. And we are the ultimate end result of the offspring promise. But all three of those promises we are receiving, the nation of Israel is not. And notice how he describes the rest. It's not a piece of dirt. It's not a land with borders. It's a place where you dwell in your own place, can be disturbed no more, and violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly. Did Israel ever receive that? No, not at all. You start the book of Judges, and it's already going south. So this is an ultimate promise. This is why you read at the end of various prophets, like Amos chapter 9 and verses 11 through 15, which James in the New Testament quotes to point out that this is happening in the time of Christ. But in that passage, he talks about the flourishing of God's people dwelling in their own land and their own place, and the reaper overtakes the sower, and the mountains drip sweet wine, and all of this. And these are symbolic pictures, not of some premillennial earth, but of a new world in which we don't have enemies that are attacking us. I don't have, obviously, not purposing to go all through this, but one other thing, the quote that God uses for the land promise with Abraham in Genesis 22 and verse 16 through 18, that is quoted by the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 6:13, where he says, I swore by myself, blessing I would bless you, and alludes to specifically that promise of the land promise. We are in process of receiving, quote unquote, the land promise. The land promise is not a piece of dirt, though. It's rest. No enemy can conquer you. That's the essence of it. Make sense? Okay, that was too fast to justify everything I said, but there you go. Thank you very much. Very good tonight. We will get the rest of chapter 7. There'll be quite a few things we're going to look at in chapter 7, so look at that.